She was 22 years old. She was living what millions of people watched and envied from their phones. A cross-country van trip with the man she loved. Sunsets over national parks, mountain views, matching outfits, Instagram posts that looked like a movie. And then one day, she was just gone. Her fiancé drove their van back to Florida, alone. He told her family she was still out there somewhere, traveling, taking space. He told police she had left him. He said nothing else. For weeks, the country watched, searched, waited. And then searchers found her body in the wilderness of Wyoming, strangled, left there while Brian Laundrie drove her van home, walked into his parents' house and said nothing to anyone. This is the complete true story of Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie, one of the most documented, most watched, and most heartbreaking cases of this entire decade. A case that forced millions of people to look past the perfect pictures and ask what was really happening behind the camera. Act 1. Who was Gabby Petito? Before we get into what happened on that trip, you need to know who Gabby Petito actually was, because she was more than a missing persons case, more than a viral story, more than a hashtag. Gabby grew up in Blue Point, New York. She was creative, artistic, the kind of person who lit up a room without trying. Friends described her as genuinely warm. Not the performed warmth of someone trying to be liked, but the real kind. The kind that makes people want to be around you. She was 22 years old in the summer of 2021. Young, full of plans, full of hope. She had found what she believed was her person, Brian Laundrie. They had been together for years. They got engaged. And they hatched a plan that sounded like a dream. Leave everything behind, convert a van, hit the road, see the country. Gabby documented all of it. Her Instagram and TikTok were filled with breathtaking landscapes, couple photos, the kind of content that makes people scroll back and look twice. To everyone watching from the outside, they were goals. The perfect couple living the perfect adventure. But behind the camera, something was already going wrong. Friends and family would later describe a shift in Gabby during those months. A tension, a worry that she sometimes tried to laugh off but couldn't quite hide. Brian's temper, arguments that happened off-screen, a dynamic that looked different in person than it did in the posts. Nobody knew how different. Not yet. On July 2nd, 2021, Gabby and Brian left Florida and pointed the van west. They had no idea, or at least Gabby had no idea, how that journey would end. Act 2. The trip. The first weeks looked exactly like what they were supposed to look like. National parks, open highways, campfires, content. They moved through state after state, posting as they went, building an audience of people who followed along and felt like they were on the trip with them. To the people watching, it was beautiful, aspirational, real. But by mid-August, the cracks that had been forming for months were becoming impossible to ignore. On August 12th, less than 6 weeks into the trip, something happened that should have changed everything. In Moab, Utah, a bystander called 911 and reported a domestic dispute between a man and a woman near their van. Police pulled the couple over. What happened during that traffic stop is now one of the most examined moments in the entire case. Officers separated Gabby and Brian. They spoke to both of them. Gabby was visibly distressed, crying, emotional, clearly in a fragile state. She told officers that she struggled with anxiety and OCD, that she sometimes hit herself when she was overwhelmed, that the argument had been her fault. Brian had a small scratch on his face. The officers made a decision. They separated the couple for the night. Brian stayed in the van, Gabby got a hotel room, and they let both of them go. No arrest, no charges, a warning, and then they drove away. That decision would haunt everyone involved for the rest of their lives. 2 days later, on August 14th, Gabby made her last contact with her mother. A text message. Her mother would later say something about the message felt off. The wording, the tone, something that didn't quite sound like Gabby. By late August, the posts had stopped. The content had gone quiet, and Brian Laundrie was driving back to Florida alone. Act 3. The Silence. On August 25, 2021, Brian Laundrie pulled their white Ford Transit van into his parents' driveway in Northport, Florida. Alone. No Gabby, no explanation to her family, no phone call to her mother. Nothing. For days, he said nothing. When Gabby's family reached out, desperate, confused, getting more frightened by the hour, Brian's family told them nothing useful. Gabby's mother, Nicole Schmidt, later described those days as a particular kind of torture. She knew something was wrong. She had known from the moment she heard Brian had come back without her daughter. But she couldn't get answers from anyone. Gabby's mother and stepfather tried everything. They called, they messaged, they went to the Northport police, they begged Brian's family for information. Brian hired a lawyer and stopped talking entirely. On September 11th, 17 days after Brian came home without Gabby, her family filed a formal missing persons report. Law enforcement got involved, and within days the case had exploded into something the country couldn't look away from. Search teams were dispatched to Wyoming, the last known area where Gabby had been. The media coverage was wall to wall. The internet mobilized in a way it almost never does. Thousands of people combing through Gabby's social media posts, mapping her route, analyzing every photo and video for clues about what had happened and where she might be. Meanwhile, Brian Laundrie sat in his parents' house in Florida and said nothing. Act 4. The Body. On September 19, 2021, 8 days after the missing persons report was filed, searchers found human remains in a remote area of the Bridger-Teton National Forest in Wyoming. It was Gabby Petito. The autopsy was conducted and the findings were definitive. Gabby had been strangled. The manner of death was ruled homicide. She had been dead for 3 to 4 weeks, meaning she had died sometime around late August, right around the time Brian was driving the van back to Florida. The country absorbed that information and the grief turned into something colder. He had known. He had driven home knowing. He had sat in that house knowing. He had let her family spend days in agony not knowing, while he knew exactly what had happened to their daughter in those Wyoming woods. The FBI named Brian Laundrie a person of interest and then a suspect. A federal arrest warrant was issued. Law enforcement descended on the Laundrie family home in Northport, but Brian was already gone. Act 5. The Hunt. The day after Gabby's body was discovered, before the news had even fully broken publicly, Brian Laundrie told his parents he was going hiking in the Carlton Reserve, a massive, swampy wilderness area near their home in Florida. Thousands of acres of dense terrain. He walked in. He never came back. For weeks, the entire country watched as law enforcement and volunteers searched the Carlton Reserve and surrounding areas. Every day brought new reports, new sightings, new theories. Brian Laundrie had become one of the most wanted men in America, and he had seemingly vanished just as completely as Gabby had. Then, on October 20th, 2021, a month after Gabby's body was found, searchers discovered human remains in a flooded area of the Carlton Reserve. Dental records confirmed it was Brian Laundrie. Beside his body, they found a notebook. Inside that notebook, Brian had written a confession. He admitted that he had killed Gabby Petito. He described it as happening during an argument, that he had strangled her. He described ending her suffering, though investigators and Gabby's family rejected any framing that suggested mercy. He had strangled her, left her body, driven her van home, walked into his parents' house, and said nothing to anyone for weeks while her family fell apart. The FBI confirmed Brian's cause of death as suicide by gunshot. There would be no trial, no cross-examination, no moment where Brian Laundrie sat in a courtroom and was forced to answer for what he did. Just a notebook in a swamp and a confession that came too late for anyone it might have helped. Act 6. What It Left Behind. The Gabby Petito case did not end with Brian Laundrie's death. In many ways, it was only beginning. The traffic stop in Moab became one of the central points of public discussion. How had officers looked at that scene? A crying woman, a man with a scratch on his face, a dynamic that multiple witnesses had flagged as concerning, and walked away without making an arrest. Use of force experts and domestic violence advocates examined the bodycam footage frame by frame. It became a case study in how trained officers can still miss the signs of an escalating, abusive relationship. Gabby's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the Northport Police Department, arguing that their failure to act during the August 12th traffic stop had contributed directly to Gabby's death. The case moved through the courts and became part of a broader national reckoning. They also filed suit against Brian's parents, alleging that Chris and Roberta Laundrie had known more than they ever admitted publicly, and that their silence in those critical days after Brian came home had cost the family precious time. The case also sparked an uncomfortable but necessary conversation about missing persons coverage in America, about which cases receive national attention and which ones disappear quietly into a database. Gabby's story reached every corner of the country. Many families of missing people, particularly families of missing women of color, pointed out that their loved ones had disappeared without a fraction of that attention. It was a conversation that needed to happen, and it was a conversation that Gabby's death, more than almost any other single case, forced the country to have. Closing. Gabby Petito was 22 years old. She was an artist and a daughter and a dreamer who wanted to see the country with the person she loved. She deserved to come home. Instead, she was strangled and left in the Wyoming wilderness while the man who killed her drove her van back to his parents' house and stayed silent for weeks. While her mother sent messages that went unanswered. While her family filed police reports and begged for information and held on to hope that got darker with every passing day. What this case showed, what it proved in the most painful way possible, is that the perfect pictures are never the whole story. That what looks like a dream from the outside can be something completely different up close. That the signs of danger are often visible if you know where to look. And that when those signs are missed or ignored, the consequences can be irreversible. Gabby's story changed things. It changed how people talk about van life and social media and the relationships we idealize online. It changed, or started to change, how some law enforcement agencies approach domestic disturbance calls. It put a human face on statistics about intimate partner violence that are easy to read and easy to forget. And it left behind a mother, a father, a family that will spend the rest of their lives missing a 22-year-old girl who just wanted to see the sunset over a national park. Rest in peace, Gabby Petito. You were so much more than this story, and you will never be forgotten. If this case stayed with you the way it stayed with me, hit that like button and leave a comment. What part hit you hardest? The traffic stop? The notebook? The weeks of silence while her family waited? Subscribe and turn on notifications. Every week, a real case, told completely, with every detail you need.